The third season of Bridgerton has become the most controversial season thus far, and considering that the first season had Daphne Bridgerton, her husband.
You do not trick the one you love. You do not humiliate the one you love.
Bombastic side-eye. Criminal offensive side-eye.
That is saying quite a bit. Season 3 was an adaptation of the fourth book in the Bridgerton book series by Julia Quinn called Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which sees Penelope Featherington, aka Lady Whistledown, make her match with longtime crush Colin Bridgerton. This season was okay. It was kind of mid. I feel like a lot of people can agree with it. It's a little mid. But this season was anticipated because Penelope is a fan favorite. The book it is based on is very popular, and Mikaila Coughlin is one of the most beautiful and charismatic women on the planet with fantastic breasts that deserve to be complimented. But the season, while enjoyable in a lot of ways, has left a bit of a mess that has left some fans really divided. And it also exposed something a lot of BIPOC and queer fans have always known about the fandom, that they are racist, homophobic, and not very welcoming.
Perhaps you might like to spend some of that new fortune on something more current.
Such an unexpected new face amongst them. I believe it best to show the ton that not everything has changed.
Let's discuss. Alright, so main plot line. Penelope Featherington, aka Lady Whistledown, needs to get married because her home life sucks and is at risk of getting worse if one of her sisters manages to have a male heir to their inheritance with their new husbands. Thankfully, they don't really get sex.
A woman's pleasure is somewhat more subtle than a man's. You see, when he inserts himself.
Inserts himself? Inserts himself where?
So, Penelope enlists the help of chronic study abroad thought, Colin Bridgerton, who she is also deeply in love with. Due to finding out her secret last season, Eloise Bridgerton is no longer friends with Penelope and is hanging out sapphically with Cressida Cowper, the mean girl of the ton. Cressida is also desperate to get married because her father has added up to here and is ready to marry her to some geriatric old man or send her up to the farm. Either way, not great if your whole thing is being a hot mean girl. Penelope at first goes after the vegetarian nature blonde Lord Debling because he's rich and nice. Cressida goes after him for the same reason. Penelope wins at first, but her flame for Colin still burns. And after their earlier pity kiss, Colin realizes that Penelope is stacked and falls in love with her. Right as Lord Distraction is ready to propose, he notices the sexual tension between them and tells Penelope that even though he doesn't actually want love in his marriage, he doesn't want a weirdness if he's going to be away in the Antarctic for like 3 years. The two take a carriage ride, make out, and do some second, third base action to Pitbull. Colin proposes, and that's how we end part 1, because of course for some reason decided to make this into 2 parts.
For God's sake, Penelope Featherington, are you going to marry me or not?
In part 2, we pick up from there, and the Polin plot goes from let's get Penelope unspinstered to the queen offers a very high amount of a reward to whomever can reveal the identity of Lady Whistledown. Cressida, seeing this as an opportunity to get her own money and not have to be tied on to a man, is like, I am Lady Whistledown. And because that's Penelope's #1 op, she says, not on my watch, and writes a pamphlet that lets Cressida realize that Penelope is indeed Lady Whistledown. And in the process of doing this, Colin finds out that she is Lady Whistledown as well.
All of the things you have written about me and my family.
Look, please.
I knew something was wrong.
But they have already had sex on a satay, which would have not have been my first choice because you are rich, girl. Get a high thread count bed. So they go through with the marriage, and Cressida bribes Penelope for a substantial amount of money. Colin tries to talk her out of it. It does not go well, and Cressida actually just doubles down. Penelope decides to come clean, and somehow, despite being a massive gossip and life ruiner to a certain degree, everything is fine.
Now, Barney! The bugs!
She and Colin finally have sex again. She helps him edit his travel diaries that I'm sure will have no racial undertones. And they have a son who will be the new Lord Featherington, securing her family's future. And you'd think that all of that drama would actually be enough story for an 8-episode season, but no. We have a surplus of side plots.
As we begin this next part of our journey,
Lady Danbury's half brother Marcus Anderson arrives and he's interested in Violet Bridgerton, which I get. She's got one of the best racks in the cast. I love her little face. She's perfect. And we find out that the siblings have been beefing their whole life because, like, when Marcus was like 10 years old, he snitched that she was trying to escape, which is like ridiculous because y'all are beefing at your big age about that. Like Lady Danbury, he didn't know he was 10, at most 13. Like, it's a weird plot line, and so he never actually ends up with Violet officially until the ending, so it's very weirdly drug out for 8 episodes. We didn't need this like that, although I am happy that Violet will be getting her garden watered. The Modric family inherit wealth and they struggle with that. For some reason, Will takes the advice of Benedict Bridgerton about that he can do whatever he wants and no one else's advice, which causes issues until he finally has to sell his bar because it's not seemly for a man of the peerage to have work. This plotline is not well integrated into the narrative, but it is the only narrative that we have with a happy black couple on the show. So good for them. They are melanated and happy, and they're titled. So I'm happy for them, even though the storyline was kind of mid. Benedict is having threesomes. He's officially bisexual now. Cool, great. Where is Sophie? And finally, the subplot that actually matters is Francesca debuts and falls in love with John Sterling and Earl. You know what? Actually, this is the right time for this pivot. Let me just... Yes. The peerage rankings is something that I feel like is a little unclear at times, so I figure let's just take a second to sum that up real quick. At the top of the list of the peerage are dukes. They are the most exclusive, despite what the genre would have you think, as they are like right below the monarchs. After them are marquesses, earls, viscounts, and then barons. So Francesca going from being the daughter of a viscount to now being the wife of an earl is a significant upgrade, and also makes you realize why someone like the Duke is such a really big get for them, because that's as high as you can get without marrying a prince. Their romance is really sweet, and Francesca spends the season trying to find a match that understands her emotionally, and I feel like the tenderness between them is very quiet. There were so many like positive autistic memes coming out about them, and I really felt like the show spent a lot of time developing why these two had such a genuine connection that was just so different from the other kind of romances that we've seen in the show. And Francesca tells her mother that love can look different ways for everyone, and that she truly loves John. And then at the end of the season, they do this.
You know, when I first met your father, I could barely speak my own name. I was so taken by him. I stumbled over words most familiar.
Ma, I thought we had moved past this. John
is a fine man.
Mikaila Sterling, I caution you. Every sordid detail John has spoken about me is a lie. The truth is power.
I'm Francesca.
We'll get there into why that's kind of messy, despite, I think, having good intentions, just really annoying execution. Alright, am I missing anything? Oh yeah, Kate and Anthony are in love, but they are not around because the actors are working on other projects, and so we have enough time with them to remind ourselves that they are hot, they are in love, and other people got problems in their marriages, but that has nothing to do with them.
Marriage takes hard work, but it is work that is worth it.
Our marriage is not hard work.
You are wearisome tonight.
Anthony is happy with his hot wife, going on his hot wife. Who's Edwina? I don't know. They're going to India at the end of the month. Halle Berry, hallelujah, and that's what you missed on Bridgerton. This video is sponsored by Skillshare, the largest online learning community for creatives. Everything you'd be interested in, from graphic design to photography to bookbinding. Remember, it is illegal to sell bound fan fiction. Do it yourself. Classes are designed for creatives by creatives. I always see Skillshare's platform as a way to get closer to your hobbies. Got jealous of all the people at DreamCon with their amazing cosplays? Then try out custom fashion applique techniques for clothing and cosplay by designer and illustrator Mary Rose. Want to learn how to get so amazing at your writing you could start your own gossip column that you use to manipulate the people around you until your longtime crush gives in, like Bridgerton? Well, none of the classes are that specific, but you can get started with writing lessons to improve your story writing skills to at least get on the right path to developing memorable characters. You can do the learning path, develop memorable fictional characters, which has 3 videos from 3 authors, all about how to develop and craft interesting characters and stories. Maybe with less manipulation, but it's up to you. The pen is your weapon. The first 500 people to use my link today in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today.
Debutantes aside, there is also the question of which gentleman will reveal himself as the prize of the season.
Let me start off by saying that I don't think there's anything wrong with Luke Newton, who plays Colin. He seems really nice, and he and Mikaila have a ton of chemistry together on the press tour, like an amount that made fans break the fourth wall into tiny pieces. A little terrifying, not gonna lie, but Colin this season feels like kind of a mess. He's got this raging study abroad energy that comes up whenever he talks about his travels. Also, his attempts at being charismatic and handsome in a hyper masculine way just read very awkward, and some have argued that it's intentional for it to be awkward and not really well fitting, and I think that would have been better expressed if the women of the Ton weren't lapping up his lines like it was fucking honey from the tree. Like, if it works too well, then it doesn't actually express what you want it to.
I cannot begin to share my travel adventures with you. If I did, you would swoon.
It also doesn't play to Newton's strengths if we've seen him with that character. From the very start, he's been kind of a simp and very emotionally leaning, and we saw how romantic and tender he was with Marina in season 1 and still carrying that torch in season 2. I understand that this entire arc is meant to show his sort of disillusionment with romance and then finding his way back into it, but I don't think it was done in an effective way, and it just made Colin feel kind of icky at the beginning without a real transition back. And I don't think we got a really good sense of what switched for Colin and when he truly fell in love with Penelope. As for Penelope, while she's giving a lot of the glory and grace of this season, we also have to come face to face with how Whistledown in this show has been turned into a much more antagonistic force and malevolent figure that uses her pamphlet like a burn book. It makes the tension really ramped up for television, but the conclusion ends up being really unsatisfying. There are so many moving parts that are meant to bring in multiple characters that don't really serve any purpose when the conclusion is everyone's fine with it. Which is the problem with taking a romance series and turning it into this very large, almost untenable ensemble that will need to justify each of the actors being present for multiple seasons. People keep talking about how much they wanted more Kate and Anthony, but if we invested any more time in them, it would take away from Colin and Penelope, the central story. Even though the books in the series are interconnected, we still spend a majority of the novel working on telling the story of one couple. Their story ends, and while they can pop up in other books, it's only for a scene or two to be a supportive character. Really, Violet is probably the most present throughout the entire series. Because a romance is meant to be an intimate story where you sell the audience on that couple in 300 pages, where they change and evolve due to the love that they have for each other. Colin and Penelope in the book series has been a one-sided pining on Penelope's part, with Colin being painfully oblivious to it. Then when Colin finally realized how badly he wants Penelope, he's too horny to function for a significant time. We have been robbed of multiple boob-grabbing scenes, honestly. In fact, in the books, Colin has 2 personality traits. He loves to eat, and he loves his wife. there might be a correlation there. With the fake relationship drama between Penelope and Lord Debling, which we all know will lead to nothing and takes time away from developing more of Polin, it just feels like we're losing the strands a little bit. Like, we don't need this much foreplay before we get to the main attraction. This is a romance. We can't have too much of our main couple bonding and coming together, especially since this is childhood friends to lovers, which I think is kind of a stretch, but you know, it is the intent. They also spend all this time developing Cressida's personality, only for Eloise to ultimately be unsupportive and dismissive of her genuine distress. Also, why is Lord Debling no longer an option for her? He kind of just vanishes off the board in a very awkward way to allow Cressida to still be the mean girl who bribes Penelope that she is in the books, but like, wouldn't that option still be on the table? Like, what does she need to bribe Penelope? Like, did Lord Debling just be like, you bitches are crazy, I'm leaving the town? Which is possible, but I would like that to be explained. The queen is there, but she's doing the same thing she does every season, except that now that we've seen Queen Charlotte, we're just like, you the best. I don't love Queen Charlotte, but I think as of now, they have the best love story out of the whole bunch of them.
I am a madman. I am a danger. In my mind, there are different worlds creeping in. The heavens and the earth collide. I do not know where I am.
Do you love me?
You do not wish a life with me for yourself. No one wishes that.
George! I will stand with you between the heavens and the earth. I will tell you where you are. Do you love me?
I love you!
The smartest thing they do this season is set up Francesca and John's relationship early, but we're going to put a pin in that because we will get to it later. But then we also get Benedict. Girl... The way they had those threesomes on screen, and I fast forward through that shit, who cares? Like, it was so dry and boring. I was like, who are these people? I feel like the streets knew Benedict was LGBTQI from the beginning, and just dragging it out all this way has been really dry. Like, and rather than even getting to explore more of that in an engaging way, we have another season with a false love interest blonde woman and like a nameless, less interesting dude as well. And I'm just like, when I tell you that not even the representation, the spirit of pride itself could not get me interested in this storyline. When it's like, let's just get to Sophie. We don't need all of these uninteresting characters. Some have speculated that this love interest will have some tie to Sophie, but honestly, I'm tired of being jerked around. We don't need fake love interests in a romance series. Like, let's just get to it. Like, maybe we can have these characters develop and be interesting in their own right so that we're excited to have them be in relationships and not just all these like fake starts. And the fake love interests end up doing more harm than good in my opinion. Like, it still astounds me that they took the character of Marina, made her connected to the Featheringtons and not the Bridgertons, and put her as part of this weird dynamic between Colin and Penelope when they knew that Colin and Penelope were going to be an endgame relationship, and thought that that was a good idea because it instantly turns Lady Whistledown from a neutral insight into the Ton into an active menace. It makes Penelope a more morally great character that the narrative is ultimately not going to deal with. Because don't get me wrong, this is the Penelope Featherington stan account, okay? I root for women's wrongs, okay? I don't care that she dragged Eloise on sight. I have no love for that girl. But narratively, it just sets the show up to be raising up stakes that it ultimately cannot meet. And let me be clear, what Marina was doing was wrong, and I understand the helplessness that Penelope felt, but there were other ways she could have handled that entire situation, but it shouldn't have existed in the first place. I don't think it did anything but create sins that Penelope would have to then not be held responsible for, and for them to be done to a woman of color, one of the few women of color at the time on the show that had a love story. I mean, right now, Mikaila is really popular. How much time do we think we're going to spend with her in the future to really deal with these things? And will it be fulfilling to watch her just catch, like, L's constantly from people who rightfully have beef with her? I don't think that would be an engaging narrative, especially because it's kind of implied with this season that the nature of Lady Whistledown is probably going to change. Especially because Dame Julie Andrews is in her 80s and needs to rest those vocal cords for something of more importance, like The Princess Diaries 3. You know, how many side quests are we going to do for the Queen and all these other actors to keep them locked in, especially with only a few episodes a season? Splitting it into 2 parts, only having 8 episodes while having 2-year breaks in between at least. And I think people are just wondering why it is taking this long when there is a book as a template. Like, it wasn't perfect, but we had a new season of Downton Abbey every year. And Christmas specials. Like, give us a Bridgerton Christmas special. And if it's just that there takes like a week to film like one scene, maybe we can adjust them so that we are not having everyone on set constantly. Like, I don't want us to go back to a place where we are having actors tormented for 22 episode seasons and not being able to take breaks or take sleeping breaks or anything like that. But I think that there needs to be a better balance between what we have now and what's been happening. Just to touch on comparisons, I have read all of the 8 books in the Bridgerton series and I rate them on my TikTok. And to justify that time, I was able to like compare and contrast. And each season has made a range of changes from the original book, adding things, taking some stuff away, and adjusting the way characters are connected. Some of the biggest things that concern this story is around Penelope's identity as Lady Whistledown. In the book series, Lady Whistledown is a gossip and overall neutral, catty at times, but there isn't the same agenda that we see in Penelope's writing on the show.
This girl is the nastiest skank bitch I've ever met. Do not trust her. She is a fugly slut.
We also don't find out that she's Lady Whistledown until this book, which is 4 books into the series. Colin finds out that Penelope is Lady Whistledown before they get engaged. In fact, he finds out and they talk about it during that carriage scene where he's both like mad at her, frustrated, and then is so turned on by how hot she is that he just starts making out with her in the carriage. Again, we were robbed of so many titty moments. You know, Nicola's like, I have fantastic breasts. And I'm like, representation matters, guys. What are we doing here? Like, chop chop. I think the change of him finding out that she's Lady Whistledown later makes sense for like a drama, but not for a romance. Because in the book, Colin's true issue with Penelope's work is his own jealousy, his own sense of insecurity about what his purpose is, feeling adrift about his art, which I think is something that kind of got superimposed onto Benedict as his art kind of gets more of a focus than Colin's. But that's their main issue going forward. He is overall supportive of Penelope. He believes in her. And I think that having that trust at the beginning is so important to the later part of the book. While she's dealing with so much anxiety about being exposed, that Colin is on her side. And at least with their relationship, there is trust there. We instead spend time in the book on the personal issues between them that help them go closer. It also means that none of their intimacy is tainted by miscommunication or deception. They can just enjoy being together. And I think that the inclusion of Marina into Colin and Penelope's relationship, a pure show invention, is just something that doesn't get overcome in the show. And I think that's unfortunate because I really do enjoy Penelope and Colin overall in their book. Like, at first I really hated Colin because he was like, wow, I'm into Penelope, this is so weird. They're like, of course you're into Penelope. Penelope is hot. Get it together, man. But I think once we got past that whole awkward period, like, they really had a fun relationship and he was really into her. It's not just about wanting more sex, because I think that's kind of like a weird way of saying that. I think it's about the intimacy, the tension, the feeling of just them being drawn together. And I think while you see that from Penelope's side, I think with Colin, with all of this whole pretentious study abroad energy, you kind of lose that from his perspective, at least for me. I know people will disagree. When it comes to the diversity in Bridgerton, I have always had a lot of mixed feelings about it. If you look at my first video about it and my video about my concerns about Queen Charlotte, I think that Bridgerton has done well by being inclusive, but has set a lot of its Black and non-white talent up to be heavily scrutinized. Not by being included, but by trying to set its inclusion in some realistic way rather than just allowing BIPOC people to simply exist. It doesn't help that Julia Quinn's series didn't include marginalized people because, in her own words, quote, I write about these happy love stories about people who were living a very comfortable life and had all these good things going on for them. And I don't think Black people and homosexuals were living that way during that time I was writing. And I don't want to write about that. I don't want to write about the kind of life they were living. You can check out my video for more context about this Mary Sue article about this, and a podcast that has this quote and an interview about it that I will link to all down below. Needless to say, this is a very messy comment, even if taken under the best intent of she feeling that she doesn't have the scope to talk about a multiracial, sex positive, queer positive Regency era. It's still very frustrating when there are Black and queer writers who do this anyway, and the assumption that if you're going to write about us in this period, it has to be unhappy. Like, y'all already invented like 75 million more dukes than existed, so like it shouldn't be that intense. Rather than just do a purely race-neutral dynamic, Bridgerton has tried to bring up race at times, but then not really sit with any of the larger implications of what that means. Mainly colonialism that would be taking place during this period. Everyone was really surprised to find out that King George III in Bridgerton is the King George III from, the American Revolution.
You'll be back.
And I've long been frustrated with the fandom's treatment of Regé-Jean Page and his departure from the series. The way that they sort of mock the idea that he left to strike while he felt his iron was hot, and that they still compare him to Jonathan Bailey is really frustrating, because let's address that. Firstly, Page has been in other projects since Bridgerton. As far as I'm concerned, in this house, Dungeons & Dragons was a box office success. It is not their fault that it flopped. Secondly, Bailey is white. Of course he's gonna have more opportunities to do things. That's the way these things work. Him being a man of color, Page will always be held against him. Thirdly, if we want to do a comparison, Simone Ashley has done one major project where she's been the lead in since, versus Mikaila, who's been attached to multiple major projects since being in this role. There's just a different reality for these actors and actors of color. Plus, Page was playing a Black male character who was by his partner, an action that she is never sufficiently called out for. Why would coming back to that be appealing? Not to mention the harassment that he faced when he became the Duke in the first place. Simone Ashley has fared a little bit better because her face card has no limit, but in this season, with the introduction of Victor Ali's John Sterling, we saw colorism at new heights. Not only were people upset that he was dark-skinned and therefore not hot enough, but they wanted his cousin, Francesca's other love interest, to be a lighter, light-skinned man, if not a white man who looked like Henry Cavill. Maron. It's a sickness. He's not even on The Witcher anymore. You want her to be on fucking Bridgerton? I'm trying to just get him to be on fucking House of the Dragon, girl. Then it only further frustrated people when Michael was revealed to be Mikaila, who is played by a dark-skinned Black woman. So of course, that has led to an onslaught of homophobia on top of the racism and colorism that we've been dealing with in the fandom since day one. In Bridgerton thus far, we have seen gay relationships exist, but in the background. With the series being made up of 8 books featuring 8 siblings, it is unrealistic to expect all 8 to be heterosexual in an adaptation made in 2024. People already called Benedict, and others felt like Eloise was the other natural person, we'll get to that, who would be queer. So to a degree, yes, it was a little bit surprising that it was Francesca. That's not an excuse for you being homophobic, though. Now, before I get into the larger issues, I do want to talk about the good faith disappointments that are possible to have about this choice. The argument of people were fine when it was Eloise, I think sometimes lacks nuance about why people feel that way. It's because Eloise's book isn't that popular, even though I do personally like it. In the series, Eloise's love interest is Sir Philip, the husband of her distant cousin Marina, yes, not Marina, who passes away from illness after an attempted. Eloise writes to Sir Philip, and through their correspondence, they fall in love, or at least find an attraction to each other. What is controversial is that Sir Philip slept with Marina in a way that is written as somewhat spousal, a subject we know Julia Quinn is not good at addressing. So while it is framed as a sort of sad moment for Philip in the text, I think for a lot of readers, it more so sets him up as someone who was willing to have sex regardless of true consent. And so for a lot of fans of the book series, Sir Philip is seen as a rapist, so they don't like him anyway. Add to that, Eloise is a totally different character in the books than the show. Every aspect of their relationship as it was set up in the books has already been altered in some way, so there is no need to expect or even want Eloise's story to be the same as the books at this point. They are completely different animals, especially since her friendship with Cressida was already so much more interesting than literally anything else she has managed to do for 3 seasons. When it comes to Mikaila and Francesca, I'm all for the change in the sense that I really would love to see a dark-skinned queer woman on this show. Like, that's all I've been asking for ages, is for like more dark-skinned people on the show. So that's great. What does give me pause is that they've already set up the relationship as Francesca falling instantly for Mikaila and undermining the quiet romance with her and John that we spent time with. And as someone who realized that they were bisexual by the classic fell in love with my college best friend dynamic, I think it's totally valid to have a story about falling in love with someone later or discovering your sexuality later. I just feel like what made Francesca's story really great was that she had 2 great loves and that they both mattered equally to her. If the end game is that Francesca is a lesbian who was in a compulsory heterosexual relationship, call back to my previous video, that's totally fine. I just wish they hadn't put a dark-skinned black man into this situation where he would be endlessly harassed only to be sort of like a between relationship for a character figuring out they were a lesbian. And like, I let him be white then if that's the situation that we're going for. Like, I'm not really wild about that just from a dynamics point of view. If she is bisexual and this is how they're portraying that, it's also kind of mid. Yes, I know we have a season to go and things can still develop and I'm giving it that grace, but when we have at least 2 years of time to speculate, then speculation we shall have, because we've only gotten this so far. And I personally don't love the idea of treating LGBTQ characters as like last minute twists in a series. Like, I just don't think that's fun or fair or like really interesting. Like, why couldn't you just say that Francesca was gonna have a queer narrative overall to begin with? And it also, there are plenty of historical queer people and at the level of the peerage that we are dealing with that I feel like we could have some inspired creative storytelling that could pull from like real life examples. You know, Gentleman Jack was an example of showing this. So like, I think that there's a lot of room for things to be good here. It's about how they put it all together, and execution just matters so much more than just saying, oh, we checked this box inclusion wise. And I think sometimes Bridgerton fails to really have the world building reflect the inclusion that they are trying to have. You know, I think if we're going to play fast and loose with the source material, which I think is a good instinct because I don't think the books are perfect, and create these really uneven racial lines, then I want the show to be more creative with queer stuff, which is also a problem in some ways because of the era and the fact that the entire series is unfortunately structured around the gender and social politics of the Regency era. But I didn't choose to adapt this series, so that's not my problem right now. The problem is that Julia Quinn's world, and by its exclusionary world building that she has, built up a white audience that enjoys that. It has built up expectations about that have been subverted since the beginning, but have always been with problems. As Mikaila Makusha brings up in her article with The Guardian, even if you go back to Regé-Jean Page being cast the Duke of Hastings, there were hashtags saying "not my Duke." People harassed the actress who played Edwina, and the actress came and said that some friends told her that the only reason that she got her job on Bridgerton is because she was brown, which is fucked up because she has the face card that again does not expire. Can you imagine seeing this beautiful woman and being like, oh, you only got your job because you're brown? Racism is an illness. In the article, they spoke to entertainment writer Amanda Ray Prescott, who's actually my mutual on X, so shout out to her, about this issue. And she said, the source of the problem is fans who resent Julia Quinn, the author of the novels, for dealing with Shonda Lynn and Netflix to begin with. They wanted the world of Bridgerton to remain white and heterosexual, to the detriment of expanding viewership among people of color and queer audiences. And I find this to be so ridiculous, because the success of this series is because of the diversity. It would not be what it is without that. And the fandom of the book's inability to understand that a series cannot, in 2024, tell us that in a family of 8 siblings, none of them are gay. The math does not math. And for the general anxiety about issues of inheritance or infertility, which were also aspects of Francesca's books, there are easy ways to sort of have the storylines be touched on without it being a very big issue. I did some research, and in Scotland, women can inherit. Just another reason why Scots are better. As for the general disappointment, to a degree I understand. Francesca's book is my favorite in this series. I think her and Michael had one of the better relationships, and I think it was nice to have a female heroine who wasn't a virgin. Michael's pining was super hot, and I like that he fell first, but was too noble to do anything to hurt his cousin. I think that it was the story I looked the most forward to being adapted, but that doesn't mean that it is gonna be totally ruined by anything. Like, that's such a hyperbole for a show that has already changed so much at this point, for better or for worse. And this doesn't mean that those aspects are going to be gone. Lesbians invented pining, so that's great. And I would hope that by having a queer showrunner, that would mean that we will actually have some sexy sapphic love scenes, which would be great to have in a series like that. I think that that would be really important. Francesca can still have fertility issues. She might even end up being child-free, who knows. I think that showing that struggle can be powerful, but doesn't have to happen exactly as it did in the books. They can still have all those things that make that storyline good. It's just about how are they going to adapt it in a way that will be engaging and creative. And honestly, that's just a writing issue. The writing should be good, and that's the standard that should be held to regardless of what gender any of these characters are. I think, if anything, the pressure is on for the showrunner, Jess Bronnell, to show us why they made these choices and make a good storyline. I'm not upset about the changes. I think that they are sometimes very necessary. And if they're being made with care, then that's fine. And I emphasize that part because it is cruel, in my opinion, to put actors in color in this shitty position if it's gonna have shitty writing. Like, if you're going to, like, gender ban and race ban, let the material be good, Lord. If not, let the whites and straights keep it. I don't need that.
It feels right now that the next thing may change me entirely.
Bridgerton won't be back for at least another 2 years, and in that time, who knows what will change and be adjusted behind the scenes. You know, I just really want to make it to that age, honestly. I think this season had a lot of moving parts and a lot of expectations, but I think if there was one thing missing from this season, it was a sense of awareness of what people are looking for in a romance series. This was a problem in season 2 with a lack of Canthony, which people were complaining about even then. That there was too many subplots and there wasn't enough focus on the relationship, and that we didn't get to see them actually be happy and together like they were in the books. Like, making the fake wedding plot drag until the very fucking end. Like, every time I rewatch that season, I'm like, why are we at the altar, Lord? Why is the queen present? Why is this taking so long? Just dump her sister. Just leave her alone. And also being aware of the faces and people you are putting on the screen. Mikaila, who has used every opportunity to show her ceasefire pin, has been the victim of fat phobia and awful body takes. Yet the showrunner told Refinery 29 Australia that Penelope's weight and body has nothing to do with her role this season. And while I get that this was probably meant to say that she's not going to go through intense dieting like she does in the book series, I think it's also disingenuous to, like, say that when Penelope's weight is very much a part of the narrative, even if you're not explaining it. Like, Penelope is constantly treated like the fat best friend, treated as the fat sister. Part of why she is mistreated by her family is because of her body.
Penelope is quite nervous. This will be her very first season.
I am not nervous, Mama.
What she is 2 stone heavier than she ought to be.
Those blemishes on her face are quite difficult to conceal.
And we don't need to make dieting or anything about that super serious, but I think to say something like that is also very disingenuous, especially when half of what Mikaila is being asked to discuss is her body and her age the entire time. All of it, and trying to write around that issue, is not how you avoid stepping into problematic tropes. You counter that by having solid writing, by having her be confident in her body, and by doing what you have been doing, which is not putting her in a dumb fat suit or anything like that. But ignoring it doesn't take away that that is the subtext of her character. And I think that's a big thing that needs to be noted, is that even if you don't want to address colorism and race explicitly, it's still there. You cannot have diversity and inclusion in a show and not also understand that that has to matter. Those little things add up in a show that wants all the praise of progressive diversity, but then fails the people who bring it on screen. With 3 actors of color having come out to talk about how horrible the experience has been for them, they need to do better about making sure that that isn't being repeated. Because how can you be diverse on the screen if behind the scenes the people there aren't supporting you?